What's going on, teammates? Welcome to the Scott Mann Podcast. This is a solo podcast, and the title of this podcast is Leading Through Shovel Fights. And I chose this topic because it seems like here lately there's been a lot of conflict in the country, coming off the heels of the Charlie Kirk assassination. You see so much conflict in the country right now. And that's not the only thing, obviously, that has contributed to that, but it's been a major catalyst. And it's hard not to look at that and see the secondary and tertiary effects of that across our society at every level. And, you know, in a lot of ways, rightfully so, right? Because of the responses that people are, you know, the emotional responses that people are feeling. But the way that it's manifesting in many ways, to me, is concerning. But this is unfortunately it's the latest in what has been a series of events, episodes in the churn where we are pulling further and further apart from one another. And I get so many questions and comments as I travel around and talk to folks about human connection and storytelling as we perform our play Last Out. Just at a community level, like, you know, how do I lead through this? How do I lead my family through this? What's the move for me in all of this? Because it's hard to know what to believe, isn't it? In this realm of disconnection and distrust and disengagement, it's hard to know where you fit in all of that. So it feels like just a constant churn that's going on around us, and so I thought I might offer some thoughts on leading through what I call a shovel fight. And the reason that I chose that is because it's a story from my book, Nobody's Coming to Save You, that I picked to share with you today. From, I think it was my first tour in Special Forces in Afghanistan in 04-05, and it's how to navigate a shovel fight. Medic, Carl called on his radio. We need ambulances at Gate 2 now. The Special Forces team sergeant motioned for the Afghan guards to carefully approach 3 filthy Toyota pickup trucks. Wounded men screamed from the vehicle beds as others, dressed in traditional Afghan garb, lowered tailgates. "Johnny," Carl said to his interpreter, "tell them to put their weapons on the ground and let the guards search them. Security first," he thought. "Then we'll get to the bottom of this fiasco." 3 rifles were placed on the ground and the guards patted down each man, even the wounded, who continued to moan and cry out. They were crumpled and bleeding, each on their own stretcher. Next to them was a collection of bloody shovels. The ambulances soon arrived, and they had to get these men. They had to get to these men ASAP. The senior medic grabbed one end of a stretcher and started to pull. "Holy," he whispered. The man's face was completely caved in on one side. It was one of the worst wounds the medic had seen. What happened here? As soon as the injured men were in the ambulances, the medics applied tourniquets and gave the wounded IVs, and a short while later, the ambulances took off for the nearby clinic, followed by a cloud of dust. Hopefully, the men would make it. Carl turned back to the 5 uninjured men who had brought them their wounded. They were 20 feet away, being watched over by his Afghan guards. He grabbed Johnny and they walked over to them. Just another day in Afghanistan, Carl thought. 2 of the men squatted together, and the other 3 stood separately, casually smoking. Everyone watched Carl with interest and a total absence of fear. "Let's get to the bottom of this," Carl said to Johnny. Johnny began speaking to the men. The squatters responded first, but the smokers chimed in, and the discussion got heated. The squatters stood and started pointing at the trucks. They kept talking about the shovels, Johnny explained to Carl. The argument continued for a minute or more before the Afghan guards broke it up and quieted everyone down. Johnny talked to them for a while longer and then turned to Carl. "The wounded men come from 2 clans who live in a nearby valley," Johnny explained. "Apparently one clan doesn't have enough water to farm. That's what started it." "Shit," Carl said. Johnny continued. "This morning, Jean Mohammed, that's the one with the caved-in head, decided to redirect a branch of the river. He went with 3 of his brothers to dig a trench on the other clan's land. Sabir, the patriarch of the other tribe, noticed them trespassing and grabbed his sons and brothers to confront them. Then the Tarbarwali started." "Tarbarwali?" Carl asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "A blood feud between cousins," explained Johnny. "Nice." "Yep. Anyway, after that, words were exchanged, and then Sabir's younger brother attacked John Mohammed with his shovel. Damn, Carl exclaimed. Johnny ignored him. Then everyone started fighting with their shovels. After the dust settled, these guys, who weren't involved, brought them here. I remember, all these names have been changed, but I remember when this happened, and I learned about it, after the event, and was talking to some of those that were involved. And to me, what was striking about this was that when you first rolled up on it, you thought it was, something else, until you dug deeper and you saw that it was really a feud that had been going on for quite some time, and it was over resources, and it was between cousins, right? It was between family, but it had evolved so quickly and so ugly that it became literally a shovel fight. And it always stuck with me. I ended up going back to Afghanistan a few times after that. But that shovel fight was just always a metaphor to me for just how quickly things can just go to shit when we surrender our agency, when we allow anger and extreme emotions to take over. We can go primal really fast. And, frankly, I don't think that's unique to Afghanistan. I don't think it's unique to a special forces deployment or a military deployment. While we may dress differently and we may consider ourselves to be more civilized, and in many ways we are in some cases, but in some cases we're not. The reality is we are all capable of some version of that shovel fight. And that's what I want to talk about today, because as I think about, when I think about what's happening around us, the way that I always try to think about it is from the framework of human connection. And how do we lead through this? How do we lead through the shovel fights that we're seeing, both physical and, virtual? Mainly because our kids are watching us, right? Mainly because, as whether we have a title or not, I think we have an inherent responsibility to leave this place better than we found it for our kids. And I think that's what most, if not all of us, want to do in some measure. So how do we do that? How do we bring the temperature down to such a point that we can actually start to do that in a way that is relevant to us as parents, as leaders in our community, as business owners? How do we lead through this? How do we navigate this shovel fights that are happening all around us? And they are, right? I mean, everywhere you look on social media, look at the extremes that are happening. And I do agree with several folks out there that have said that, a lot of the stuff that is happening on social media, in my assessment, a lot of these are cartoon characters that are simply playing a divisionist mindset. A divisionist, in my definition, is someone who foments instability between groups to form in-groups and out-groups to advance a narrow agenda, rather than bridging social capital and trying to promote trust and a way of moving through a crisis or something by coming together and actually uniting people. We have a lot of divisionism in the country today, both sides of the aisle. I don't think it's reserved for one side of the aisle or the other. There's a level of contempt in this country that Sebastian Junger talks about in the book Tribe that is normally reserved for one's enemies. Now we're demonstrating that same level of contempt to our neighbor. And you can see it everywhere. And contempt coupled with moral superiority, coupled with a level of rigid ideology, that is the devil's cocktail in this time of churn. And it's something that it continues to feed on itself, right? And it formulates this kind of shadow tribalism where people are operating in a trance state all the time and surrendering their agency to where things just devolve into shovel fights, And so I don't think it has to be that way. I really don't. And I think that a lot of the people that are getting sucked into that are capable of shaking this off and finding another way through it. I am far more concerned about how we treat each other around these issues in many cases than the issues themselves, because I've seen, and I know others watching this have too, I've seen how this ends if we continue down this pathway of shadow tribalism, right? It does not end well. And so I've got some thoughts maybe that I'd like to offer. I believe people who can lead through these shovel fights, whether they have a title or not as leaders, are the ones we're going to follow. They're the ones who are going to be relatable to people's pain, and they're the ones who are going to be relevant to the goals at hand. And it's not easy. Like, it is really difficult to lead through these kinds of times. But the last couple of decades, it's something I've really tried to focus my time on and tried to understand. The way I try to come at it is in what I call in my book, the human operating system, that below the waterline of the iceberg of how we navigate the world, how we think about things. And how do we tap into our own innate nature, or as Dr. Ivan Tyrrell calls it, our human givens, those innate physiological and emotional needs that we have, and to leverage those in a way that is responsible and pragmatic and allows us to be relatable to people's pain and relevant to their goals, to lead people through challenging times. And I just feel like that's what a lot of people are asking themselves right now. I think if you could just bring the tone and tenor down, that's what people probably would prefer to do. And so I'm just going to offer up some thoughts on this. A lot of this comes from the amazing Special Forces NCOs and junior officers who I witnessed on a daily basis doing this in some of the most diabolical, toughest places on earth, where trust was so depleted and the churn was so high and the shovel fights were so real. But yet I had the opportunity to stand on the shoulders of these amazing special operators, particularly Green Berets, who I was around, that just found ways to navigate these shovel fights. And I want to share some of the observations that I made in being in the presence of these amazing human beings, and what we might parlay right here at home. Because it's, I know it's easy to say, okay, yeah, but what does that, what you did over in Afghanistan, what does that have to do with this right here? And I'm not talking about, being tougher or curling more logs in this case. I'm talking about those old school interpersonal skills and understanding our human operating system in such a way that we don't surrender our agency to whatever divisionist comes along and spreads some bullshit to us and spins us up, right? I mean, that is the oldest trick in the book for the exploitation of humans. It's how it works, and it does work. I want to go the opposite way. I want to talk about what the antibody is to that. I want to talk about what the antibody is to allowing us to maintain our agency in this realm of division and shadow tribalism and actually lead through it. Okay. So a couple of thoughts that I'm going to share with you today. One is managing emotional temperature. The second one is meeting them where they are, not where you want them to be. And the third is it's hard to hate the storyteller, right? So that's just three thoughts I'm going to share today, and hopefully with some pragmatic tips and tactics that maybe you can try. And by the way, when I share these, I'm not talking about, you don't necessarily have to put them into play on Facebook or Instagram. That's a digital killing field. It is. It's not the place for discourse and free debate. It's not. This thing was it was engineered to divide us into in-groups and out-groups and then gain our attention. You can't gain attention until you divide. And the way they do that is, it's been proven that these engineers socially constructed this thing in such a way that we would share information more and with more intensity if it was fear-based or anger-based about out-groups. So you have to create the in-groups and out-groups first. So it's just whether it's 24/7 news or whether it's social media, that's not necessarily where I'm talking about employing this. You can try it. I'm talking about like in your day-to-day. I'm talking about in the real natural world where we live, not this represented reality. So anyway, the first one is managing emotional temperature. So I'm going to actually try something different here. Montel, Monty's producing today. This is our first time to produce. And so I'm going to actually do a little drawing. So let me move my mic. Too many training aids here, but I'm going to try it and we'll see if this works. You all let me know what you think. But I want to talk about managing emotional temperature first, because emotions, we are the most emotional creatures on the planet. That's how we navigate the world. Emotions are what shows up. But in this time that we live in right now, our emotional temperature, I mean, have you noticed it? Have you noticed what's going on with emotional temperature? It's through the roof, and the story that I usually share is, imagine it's 10,000 years ago and we're all, we're part of a tribe or a clan, and we're walking along, and, 3 saber-toothed tigers jump out of the bushes, and it's terrifying in that moment. The saber-toothed tigers jump out of the bushes, and a few of our tribe runs away, and then the rest of us gather our courage. We point our wooden spears and we advance towards those salivating cats, and we do battle. And a few of us are killed, others are wounded, and somehow we manage to kill one of the saber-toothed tigers, and the other 2 run off. As a horrific battle, we we grab our wounded and our dead and we carry them back to our dwelling, and the folks meet us out as we come out there, and they grab the wounded from us and start tending to them, and we're mourning over the dead, and we bury them, and then eventually, and we're shaken and we're still trying to come over it, and then eventually we build a fire. And we eat some food and we tell stories. We share lessons of the day. We honor the fallen. We talk about the ones that ran. We tell stories and we crystallize the learning, and we settle into this and metabolize the trauma. So that's the series of events that happens in that. And, if I were going to diagram that, right, I would take my little handy dandy. Tell me how I'm doing here, Montel. Take my little handy dandy whiteboard here. I even brought a whiteboard into the podcast, man. I'm pretty proud of myself. But let's just say that this is you and this is them, right? And this is a thermometer, and it represents emotional temperature, okay? And we could even say that, up here is a 10, right? Down here is a 5, and down here is a 0. That's neutral. Okay. And the other thing that we might point out here is that the midpoint on the thermometer is what we call a sympathetic state. And that is basically fight, flight, or freeze. That's the nervous system when the saber-toothed tigers jump out of the bushes and our nervous system kicks in and you go into fight, flight, or freeze, right? And you know this. I mean, you've probably experienced some version of this when you've been in a car accident maybe, or somebody jumped out and scared you and you didn't expect it. And it takes you from this neutral state into the red, right? You go into the red, into a high 10 maybe. And, the people around you, if there's people there, they may do the same. We actually mirror off each other. But it's this fight, flight, or freeze. The nervous system kicks in and we go into a trance state. The nervous system actually overrides, our frontal cortex, and the body takes care of business, man, in a primal way. And we do battle with the saber-toothed tiger. But then we come back to the dwelling. We start to treat our wounded. We bury our dead. We've got the shakes. Maybe we're throwing up, right? But then we build the fire. We start to cook some food. And what happens? The emotional temperature starts to come down. And we start to metabolize back down towards a 0, back down towards a neutral. And we start to go into what Dr. Belisa Veronich calls calm and connect, and rest and digest, right? This is where our nervous system metabolizes the trauma. We start to crystallize the learning. And what happens? We really start to connect with one another. We connect around storytelling, crystallized learning. In some ways, it's even deeper than the surface stuff. It's empathy and reciprocity. And it's what we do as humans. And it's what we've done for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Our body and our nervous system knows what to do. But in this era that we live in right now, and in the era with these dopamine dispensers, right, and the represented two-dimensional realm of the digital realm between the 24/7 news and our devices, we're living now in the sympathetic state almost all the time, which is really bad, because what we're designed to do is an episodic move into the red to fight the saber-toothed tiger, and then what? Come back down into the blue and metabolize the trauma and settle in. But right now, people are just, you know what I'm talking about, right? People are just living in the red. And then what happens is we mirror off each other. We're social creatures, the mirror neurons, and we just feed off each other, and we just stay in the red, or we're like one step away from going into the red. You're one little trigger moment away from just going in. And the problem is with this, you all, is that the responses to the things in a first world of abundance are not appropriate. The responses that we have to elections, the responses that we have to someone's opinion, right, become a response that would normally be for a saber-toothed tiger or our kids in a burning car. It's not appropriate for your 401k eroding over 6 months, but it's where we are. And so our nervous system is just hijacked, right? And it's staying in this fight, flight, or freeze mode, this sympathetic state all the time. And it's a trance state. And the problem with that trance state, when we stay in the red like this, the problem with that is that it puts us in a place of disadvantage. It puts us in a place where it's very difficult to lead. It's very difficult to get big stuff done, to move people to action, and I'll share the reasons for it right now with you, right here. Okay, and this is a passage from Dr. Ivan Tyrrell, who wrote The Human Givens. He's a world-renowned psychiatrist who studies human behavior, and this is what he writes: when the emotional brain takes over, it locks our attention on what has aroused us, to the increasing exclusion of other information from the environment. This focus means we are seeing reality from only one particular perspective, because in this type of trance, the higher cortex is less engaged in reality checking. You can see this clearly when someone gets angry and you cannot reason with them. In anger, a person is totally focused on their own point of view and will appear stupid. Ivan Tyrrell, The Human Givens. I think that's probably one of the most critical things here to understand, is that when we hit that highly aroused emotional state of anger, and remember, anger is a secondary emotion, so fear, sadness, they're going to give way to anger eventually. And when that happens, our frontal cortex shuts down. We surrender our agency in the moment we need it the most. And we become super susceptible to influence. Influenced by who? Divisionists. Anyone who is interested in fomenting instability of in-groups and out-groups to advance a narrow agenda. Know anybody that does that? And so we can argue all day long about what the origins of that, the old just psyop, or it's the institutional statists, whatever it is. We're all responsible for our own agency in the arena. And if we surrender our agency to a trance state because we're not managing our emotional temperature, that's on us. And when we live in these secondary or these represented realms, these digital realms all the time, they're designed for that. And so it's only natural that you're going to see people going into these trance states all the time. So what do we do? Well, I believe that if we want to stay away from shadow tribalism, which is what is happening to us now, we've got to put our own oxygen mask on first, right? We've got to get to neutral on that emotional thermometer. One of the best ways to do that is diaphragmatic breathing. Is a good lower body breath, 3 to 5. Expand your belly on the inhale, squeeze your belly to spine on the exhale. Step away from the event. 3 to 5 good belly breaths. I have time 3 times, and just bring your emotional temperature down, right? If you're on digital devices, please don't engage. Step away from whatever it is that triggered you and come down and reclaim your own emotional temperature before you engage. That's step one. I mean, we've got to get our own emotional temperature under control. The second one is, I think we have to also understand that we've got to get the other party ready to listen. We got to get their emotional temperature down as well, because when someone else is in a highly aroused emotional state, they can't hear you. I mean, you've probably been in an argument with your spouse before, someone close to you, and if you notice you're talking past each other, no one's listening, the ears are not even working. And so when you are in that highly aroused emotional state, and you see this all the time where people are just yelling it, just spewing at each other, they're not listening, and so you've got to bring their emotional temperature down. I will say this. I mean, if you watched Charlie Kirk when he engaged, he kept emotional temperature down, and he managed his own emotional temperature, and he brought the emotional temperature of the other party down so that they were ready to listen. Because whether you agree with his positions or not, civil discourse is where we've got to go here. And this could be just you running your business, dealing with clients. How are we going to do that if your emotional temperature is in the red? Right? Because when that happens, you look like you don't trust yourself, because your sympathetic nervous system is in the driver's seat. The elephant is in charge, not the rider. Okay. So, and then the other party, if they're in an emotional state, they can't hear you. They're not ready to listen to what you have. It doesn't matter how logical your argument is. It doesn't. That's why I'm so turned off by the digital realm for engagement, because no one's listening. Everyone's just spewing. And have you ever seen it on any platform where the spew's going and all of a sudden one person goes, you're absolutely right. Thank you for that. No one does that shit. It's just a spew fest. It's a digital killing field. It's designed that way. So how do you get the other party ready to listen? You got to bring their emotional temperature down. You got to put your own oxygen mask on first, and then you got to bring the emotional temperature down of the other party. So that's the first thing I want to get into the arena here is managing emotional temperature and thinking about emotional temperature from here on out. That I think that's a new step in engagement. It's a new step in negotiations, civil discourse, because in leadership, because until we manage emotional temperature or at least navigate it and get the other party ready to listen to what we have to say, you're just clicking each other up into the red. Okay, the next one that I'd like to talk about on this is meeting them where they are, not where you want them to be. This was actually something that I put in my book, Game Changers, that I wrote about village stability operations in Afghanistan when we were doing community engagement out in really rural areas where, frankly, there was a tribal component out there that was predisposed to not like us at all because of 40 years of war, but also because of the last 10 years of how we had rolled out of built-up fire bases and jerked people out of their homes and kicked doors in. And now we're 10 years into the war and we're trying to get into their community to get them to stand up on their own and let us live in the community to help them do it. It's like, I'm from the government. How do you like me so far? After 10 years of the other. And it was a challenge, man. And I saw some of the best negotiators in the special forces, seasoned NCOs, these sergeants that could go into these places. And it was uncanny what they were able to do. And I remember in one particular area in Cochras district, a friend of mine, Mike, and his team, they were so good, and they were having a really difficult time getting in. I remember in one conversation, the elders were so standoffish, and we asked them a very simple question. Over some period of time, we kept asking questions. Nothing moved. They weren't really willing to cooperate. And then the question was asked, what was life like before the Soviets came here? And you could just see the eyes shifted, their demeanor shifted. And one of the elders spoke up, and he's like, it was totally different. We could go to the mosque on Friday. People didn't get blown up on the way to the mosque. Kids could play outside. It was just a different time, a better time. And everybody started chiming in about what it was like. And at some point, we're just listening and continuing to ask follow-up questions. And at some point, we asked, what do you think it would take to get back to that? And they kind of paused thoughtfully and started to weigh in on that. And, what followed, to include with a series of that team really standing up for that community, what followed was them showing in action and indeed what it would take to get back to that. And they did in a lot of ways. That particular VSO site ended up being very successful because I believe a lot of it had to do with the questionology. They met people where they were, not where they wanted them to be. And that is so hard when we're dealing in these times like we are right now. Even with our kids, think about it. I mean, when I think about my kids, even now, they're grown men. When they go a certain way on something that I disagree with, I want to swoop in like dad, hands on hips and traveling Overwatch and, tell them how to do it. And that doesn't work, does it? It doesn't, because we don't like it. People like to be told, reminded what's important, not told what to do. And there's a time and place when we have to be prescriptive, and I get that, but it's really the exception, not the rule, right? And so many times I would see these Green Berets in these rural areas, they were so good at meeting people where they were, not where they wanted them to be. But and here's the thing. If you call bullshit on that, I mean, I've seen it over and over again in some of the roughest places on earth, but at the same time, Chris Voss arrived at almost the identical approach through hostage negotiations as one of the leading hostage negotiators in the world, right? And what he would tell you, and never split the difference, and in his classes, is that, you've got to bring emotional temperature down on the other party. You've got to ask calibrated questions that ultimately start with what and how, and get the other party to say that's right. Right. So because they feel seen, they feel heard, and that's when that emotional temperature comes down. So, if the first piece of managing emotional temperature is to put your own oxygen mask on first and then bring the emotional temperature down on the other party, the second piece of meeting them where they are as an intention and then not where you want them to be, the action step of that is bringing that emotional temperature down and getting them ready to listen by seeing the pictures in their head. Stuart Diamond talks about this all the time in his book, Getting More. One of the most impactful negotiations books I've ever read. And I trained under Stewart, and he would always talk about the importance of seeing the pictures in the head of the other party. And I'll go a step further. What does that mean explicitly? I think it means seeing their pain and their goals. Because we're goal-oriented creatures, we're meaning-seeking, meaning-assigning creatures, and everything manifests in life as goals. So if I can see the goals in your head, and I'm clear on the pain that's blocking that, and I can articulate that back to you and get you to say something like, yeah, that's right, then there's a very good chance that you're ready to listen to what I have to say. Now, Warren Berger calls this questionology in his book of beautiful questions. Chris Voss calls it calibrated questions. I call it thoughtful, open-ended questions that let the other party respond in narrative. Whatever you want to call them, the art and science of asking questions to see the pictures in the head of the other party as an intention so that you can meet them where they are, not where you want them to be. And what does meet them where they are? I think it culminates when you say something like, can I just share back with you what I think I've heard here? And you cite it back in the context of goals and pain. And they say something like, that's right. What was life like when before the Soviets came? And they say, and they tell you, how do we get back there? That's right. You see what I mean? Like, it's a shift. And again, you don't have to practice this in some high stakes negotiation. Practice it with your teenager. Practice it with your best friend. Practice it with your spouse. We can practice these things in the day-to-day. Why? Because these are the people we violate it with the most, right? They're the people we blow this shit off with. So this aspect of meeting them where they are, not where you want them to be, on the heels of managing emotional temperature, I believe is an intention that ends up getting the other party ready to listen. Which takes me to the third piece, which is it's hard to hate the storyteller, man. It really is. I don't see much storytelling going on today. Do you? Yet the brain is a metaphorical pattern-matching organ, according to Dr. Ivan Tyrrell. According to Dr. Kendall Haven, the brain has a mandate to make sense of the world, and it makes sense of the world through metaphor and pattern. In other words, it tells itself a story every single thing that it sees. Is there any storytelling going on out there? And if there is, it's usually a divisionist spinning some bullshit narrative to spin us up and hijack our agency. I don't subscribe to that. On either side of the aisle, it's bullshit. It is a form of shadow tribalism. It is exploitive, and it ends in bad things. But there is a way, if we show up, manage emotional temperature, ours and the temperature in the room, and we get the other party to listen by meeting them where they are, not where we want them to be. And again, you don't have to agree with a damn thing they're saying. Like, it could be like really, really rough stuff. But that doesn't preclude you from meeting them where they are. And just, this is what I heard. You don't have to agree with it. It's just what I heard. This is what you value. I mean, for God's sake, Chris Voss does it as a hostage negotiator. And it works. Because it is part of our innate human nature. It's how we navigate the world. It's actually what we're designed to do. It just doesn't feel like it is because we've been conditioned to get into shovel fights with each other. Right? But towards the end, if you can get the other party to say that's right, then I believe there's a place for storytelling where you are using your own narrative competence, purposeful stories, metaphor, framing in real time to harmonize what you've heard in terms of their goals and pain as well as yours. And I've seen it over and over again with some of these talented Green Berets that do this. And the power of storytelling, if you just look at the science of storytelling, some of the latest neuroscience studies out there by guys like Dr. Kendall Haven and his DARPA study, Story Proof, we know that storytelling is a 100,000-year-old sense-making tool. It provides meaning. It provides context. Can a brother get some context these days? You can't. You look at 24/7, there's news, there's no context at all. We are literally being mobilized into shovel fights, and there's no context. Context is everything. We have to have context to make sense of things. Stories provide meaning, and they provide context. Guess what else they provide? Emotional resonance. Some of the most recent studies on authentic influence say that you have to gain and hold the attention of the other party, and you must also resonate with them emotionally. Well, guess what? Storytelling does that, right? Storytelling provides meaning, context, emotional resonance, and long-term memory. People will remember the story for a long time. Let me ask you a question. Does anybody remember the name of the character in the first story I told, what the team sergeant's name was? If you did, put it in the comment thread. Let me know. Because most of the time, people, they can remember that. They do remember that, right? Do you remember the question that I asked in the story about the elders in Cochraze? What was the question I asked them that opened things up? We remember things with amazing detail and clarity for long periods of time when stories are told. Why? Because it engages long-term memory. That's what storytelling does. And so we remember things. And in these times of crisis and churn and shadow tribalism, if we can say things that are remembered after we're gone, that's good, man. That's really good. And then finally, it also provides shared perspective. The erosion of social capital today, you guys, really worries me. The levels of contempt and radical ideology, just rigid ideology, and moral superiority are so pervasive that shared perspective is almost non-existent. I just the other night we performed Last Out in the little town of Columbiana, Ohio, the nicest place in America. Voted that, no shit, and it is. But you know what was striking was after the play, you had all these people in there of different political opinions, different parties, people who served, people who didn't, people of different ethnicities and religions. And guess what? They had all gone through that storytelling, and they all had shared perspective of what life might be like for a military spouse, for a military child, for a Gold Star mother. And they were talking to one another as a community, as a civil society. Even Sebastian Junger in Tribe talks about, we are on a pathway right now that probably our last best hope is community as the antibody to what's going on. Well, where in the hell does community leadership come from? And it comes from you and me. It doesn't come from these mouth-breathing politicians and divisionists who are there to advance a narrow agenda, right? It comes from you and me. It comes from us asserting our agency as agents in the arena. That's where it comes from. And shared perspective is a necessary piece of rocket fuel to make that happen. And it's not hard to do. We can get shared perspective. Why? Because it's hard to hate the storyteller. If you ask thoughtful, open-ended questions that let the other party respond in story, and you can articulate goals and pain back at some point and they say that's right, then you can follow with, would it be okay? Would it be okay if I shared with you how I think we might get there? Because when that question to the elders was asked, how do you think we would get there? And they share it. There is a point and an inflection point, and it happened, where you could say, would it be okay if I share with you how I think we might be able to do that or help you do that? Now, it takes a little longer to get there, but the levels of reciprocity and the levels of connection that are there are unstoppable. Would it be okay if I shared with you how I think we might do that? And at that point, you have an opportunity to put narrative competence into play and harmonize your goals and pain with their goals and pain. Now, look, this isn't kumbaya shit, man. It's really not. Again, this, if you lay it up against, if you map it on how Chris Voss comes at hostage negotiations, it's very similar. And again, I learned this from some of the most skookum Green Beret NCOs on the planet in some of the most dangerous places on earth. But what works in life and death works in life and community, because we're all wired pretty much the same way. The human operating system hasn't changed in 250,000 years. Only the context. And so this is available to all of us. It's just below the waterline of that iceberg. That is the human operating system. It's below the surface. You can't see it. They're invisible. And we've buried them in this transactional, fast-paced, rat race, digital domain bullshit. So we just need to reclaim it. And you don't need a title to do that. You don't need permission, right? So just think about, would it be okay? And then share the story that would be the delivery vehicle of what the new pattern could look like. Of what it could actually look like, of painting that picture stroke by stroke on a white canvas. Put your narrative competence to use, and in it, articulate what you heard with their goals and pain. It is not that hard. Again, try it with your kid. It works. Or if you don't like that, if you don't like the new patterns, you can just try reflecting back what you heard and what it might look like. You know what I mean? You don't have to have some kind of hero's journey framework, but just include their goals and pain with what your goals and pain are and what it might look like as a pattern, as a narrative, as a story of what could be. What do you think about that? Just ask them, what do you think about that? And then let them come back at you. It's a dance, man. Civil discourse is a dance, and it's best danced between protagonist and antagonist. Liberals and conservatives have been sharing the same space for thousands of years. They're both necessary to civil society. And when we start treating one with the contempt normally reserved for one's enemies, we are on a path, I believe, of not only shadow tribalism and conflict in our day-to-day, but potentially organizational and societal collapse. And I don't think we're as far from it as we think we might be. You know, abundance in a first world civil society is not an entitlement. And the only way to keep bridging trust in place where we're not reverting back to that bonding trust of in-groups and out-groups and tribalism is leadership and stewardship of that mechanism. And right now, I don't see much of it. Do you? I see leaders who are divisionists, and I see people falling for it and surrendering their agency in a represented domain of the digital world and just going into a trance state. And it doesn't have to be that way. We can manage our emotional temperature. We can meet them where they are, not where we want them to be, and we can get them ready to listen, right? And then from there, we can use narrative competence to contain and share. Hey, would it be okay? What could be? Now you can use this in sales. You know, you can use this when you're trying to convince your boss of a different. It's an approach to engagement, and it works, but you got to practice it, right? And again, why? Because I think the alternative, if the only tool in our kit bag is a hammer and every problem looks like a nail, that's what's got us in this shit. And I don't think time's on our side. I really don't. I've seen how this ends in other places, and we're not that far from it. And we are not exempt from it. We have to understand our kids are watching us. Conflict is bad for business, right? And I guarantee you have clients that are Republicans and Democrats. And if 50% of your client base is excluded because you think they're the friggin' enemy, you're deluded. And you're falling for something that is divisionist in nature. It could not be more contrary to the spirit of the Constitution, and to this notion that out of many come one, a pluribus unum, right? And if we're not careful, we're looking at organizational and societal collapse, something that is just unthinkable but possible. And it starts with leadership, man. It starts with leadership, with understanding the human operating system and recognizing that the real leaders are the ones that lead through the shovel fights. I hope this was useful. It's been on my heart. It's been on my mind. I hope you'll share it with somebody that could use it. And, nobody's coming, right? It's just us. But I like those odds. Give me the leaders that are scuffed up, the ones that look around right now. More Uncommon did a survey, the Hidden Tribes of America, and found that 2/3 of Americans don't subscribe to this rigid, contemptuous bullshit that is everywhere. They don't. It's a super majority that do not subscribe to this. So let's reclaim our agency, right? Let's reclaim our civil society, our communities for our kids, because they deserve it. And we can leave it better for them than when we found it. But it starts, I believe, with understanding our human operating system, managing that emotional temperature, meeting people where they are, not where we want them to be, and then leading through storytelling, stories that stick. All right. I hope this helps. If you like the podcast, leave us a review. We'd love that. We'd love for you to subscribe. We're growing this thing one viewer at a time. And I'm glad you're here, man. Please share widely. See you on the rooftop.